Well, a very good morning to 12D and 12F students, and I also welcome my viewers on YouTube. This is Akhlaq Ahmed, and as you all know, an English teacher from AMU. And as promised, in today's session, we are going to take up memories of childhood. I'll give you a thorough analysis of the text of the lesson itself. So, in a way, you would be able to answer every question, not just at the end of the text, but overall as well. So, let's start this. First of all, I'd like to give you the meaning of one of the words which occurs in the first part of the lesson. So, please note down the meaning. The word is shingle. In fact, we say shingled hair. That is, it's a particular hairstyle, and it means hair cut close, hair cut close at the nape of the neck, NAPE, nape of the neck, and a little longer up the back of the head, and a little longer up the back of the head. यानी मतलब ये कि एक तरह का हेयर स्टाइल होता है जिसमें कि गर्दन के पीछे जो होता है वो बाल बहुत छोटे होते हैं, काटे जाते हैं, और सर के जो बाल होते हैं वो उससे लंबे होते हैं। सर के पीछे के जो बाल होते हैं, यानी सर का हिस्सा बालों का वो लंबे, और जो गर्दन के पास के नीचे के बाल होते हैं वो छोटे। तो दैट इज शिंगल। नाउ, memories of childhood. This is basically based on extracts from the writings of two women who recall their childhood experiences. Now, both of them, in fact, suffered discrimination and cruelty in their childhood, and both of them rebelled against it. So, this is the common thing between them. One of them, that is Zikalasa, uh, was the victim of racism, prejudice against a particular culture, a particular community, um, based on the color. And the other one was an Indian woman, Bama. She was the victim of untouchability or casteism, the caste system in India. Now, let's read the introduction to the two lessons. This unit presents the autobiographical episodes from the lives of two women from marginalized community, that is, the community uh, which are at the margin of the society, which is an kind of an undeveloped community, a crushed community, so marginalized community who look back on their childhood and reflect on their relationship with the mainstream culture. So, because they belong to one of the minority cultures, and they um, somehow wanted to interact with the main culture, mainstream culture, so they had to face that kind of discrimination. The first account is by an American Indian woman born in late 19th century. The second is by a contemporary Tamil Dalit writer. So the American woman was Gertrude Simmons, Bonin, born in 1876, was an extraordinarily talented and educated Native American woman. You see, America, as you all know, became free in 1776 with the coming of Magna Carta. Before that, it had to it was under control of the Britishers. So the Native Americans there had to face a lot of prejudice, especially uh, the Negroes, those who were Red Indians, those who were not white. You know, you read the autobiography by Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery. So you can recall that. So she was an American woman, Native American woman, who struggled and triumphed in time when severe prejudice prevailed towards Native American culture and women. As a writer, she adopted the pen name Zikalasa, and remember we pronounce it as Zikalasa, not Zitkalasa, and in 1900 began publishing articles criticizing the Carlisle Indian school. Her works criticized dogma, that is, authoritative principles, and her life as a Native American woman was dedicated against the evils of oppression. Bama is the pen name of the Tamil Dalit woman from a Roman Catholic family. She has published three main works, that is, an autobiography called Karuku in 1992, a novel called Sangati in 1994, and a collection of short stories entitled um, Kisumbuku Kuran. This is Tamil, 1996. The following excerpt has been taken from Kuruku. The word Kuruku means Pamira leaves, which, with their serrated edges on both sides, are like double-edged swords. By a felicitous pun on the Tamil word Kuruku, containing the word Kuru, embryo or seed, also means freshness or newness. So she has used this pun. Now, before discussing the text, let's talk about some of the important aspects in the text. You see, the two accounts that we are going to talk about are based in distant cultures. That is, the cultures very different from one of them, from each other. Now, the thing that is common between them is that both the women, as I told you, face exploitation and discrimination, and both the women rebelled against it in their childhood, though at that time, obviously, perhaps they may not have achieved success, but then they were different. They did not surrender. And, it may so happen that operation may take a long time to be resisted, but you see, what happens is that the seeds of rebellion are sowed early in life. So, what happens is that injustice is something that cannot remain ignored, that cannot be ignored, or that cannot go unnoticed, even by children. So, if it is injustice, even children will realize that. As we have seen, or as I pointed out, that Bama was the victim of caste system. whereas Zikala Saab was the victim of racism or the prejudice against the native Indians. Uh, and their responses to their respective situations are that of revolt. So these are some of the important aspects. Now we come to the first one. You see, I'll quickly read it and I'll explain only the most important part of the text. The first day in the land of apples was a bitterly cold one, for the snow covered the ground and the trees were bare. A large bell rang from for breakfast, its loud metallic voice um, crashing through the belfry overhead and into our sensitive ears. The annoying clatter of shoes on bare floor gave us no peace. The constant clash of harsh noises with an undercurrent of many voices murmuring an unknown tongue made a bedlam within which I was securely tied. And though my spirit tore itself in struggling for its lost freedom, look, she wanted to have that kind of freedom. Um, all was useless. So what happened? Gertrude was admitted to a school, and there she had to face strict discipline. Look what sort of discipline. Principles, rather authoritative principles, principles which are not even so important, but authoritatively imposed on everyone, especially here on children. So a bell was rang, or rather rung. Belfry is the bell tower, so this was a bell for the breakfast. Everyone went towards the dining hall. Now, a pale-faced
It is
woman
2
with
o'clock
white hair
a.m.
came up after us. So a woman was sort of looking after them or kind of keeping a watch on them. Look, we were placed in a line of girls who were marching into the dining room. So, this discipline, these Indian girls in stiff shoes and closely clinging dresses, the small girls wore sleeved aprons and shingled hair, that is, their hair were shingled. As I walked noiselessly in my soft moccasins, moccasins are kind of shoes made of soft leather. I felt like sinking to the floor, um, for my blanket had been stripped from my shoulders, so she was not allowed to mm, cover herself with the blanket even in the cold. I looked hard at Indian girls who seemed not to care that they were even more immodestly dressed than I, in their tightly fitting clothes. While we marched, the boys entered at the opposite doors. So the boys had a different line and they entered the dining room at the opposite door. I watched for the three young braves who came to our party. I spied them in the rear ranks, that is the back of, I mean, the ranks means lines, back rows, looking at, looking uncomfortable as I felt. A small bell was tapped, and each of the pupils drew chair from under the table. Supposing this act meant they were to be seated, I pulled out mine, and at once slipped into it from one side. But when I turned my head, I saw that I was the only one seated, and all the rest at our table remained standing. So you see, a bell was tapped, everyone pulled their chair, so did Zikarasa, and she thought that it meant that they were to be seated. But, you know, she sat down immediately, but then she realized that everyone was standing apart from her. So look, just as I began to rise, looking shyly around to see how chairs were to be used, so she didn't even know how to use the chair at that time. Such rules were imposed. A second bell was sounded. All were seated at once. So just when she was about to, you know, stand up, another bell was sounded and everyone was seated. And I had to crawl back in my chair again. I heard a man's voice at the end of the hall, and I looked around to see him. But all the others hung their heads over their plates. As I glanced at the long chain of tables, I caught the eyes of a pale-faced woman. So, at that moment, when the person was chanting the prayer, what happened that everyone got hold of the forks and the knives, perhaps getting ready for the breakfast. But in the meantime, she realized that a pale-faced woman was keeping a watch on her. Immediately, I dropped my eyes, wondering why I was so keenly watched by this strange woman. So, you see, there was going to, something was going to happen to her perhaps. The man ceased his mutterings, and then a third bell was tapped. Everyone picked up his knife and fork and began eating. Now they started eating after the third bell. Obviously, Zikara Sahib was not familiar with this kind of discipline or these principles, so she felt very uncomfortable. That's why she says, I began crying instead, for by this time I was afraid to venture anything more. Uh, she was really afraid to try anything else because she thought that something strange might happen. But this eating formula was not the hardest trial, not the hardest examination, in that first day. Late in the morning, my friend Judwin gave me a terrible warning. Judwin knew a few words of English, and she had overheard the pale faced woman talk about cutting our long hair, heavy hair. Look, so they had already planned that her hair would be cut. Our mothers had taught us that only unskilled warriors who were captured had their hairs shingled by the enemy. Among our people, short hair was worn by mourners, that is, who were lamenting, and shingled hair by cowards. So she belonged to a culture where shingled hairs were considered to be a symbol of cowardice. So she didn't like it, obviously. But look how cultures dominate, uh, how prejudice prevails. That is because they were different, because they were Indian girls, Native American girls, so their hair were long, and they forcefully, shingled their hairs. So it was a kind of a cruelty. We discussed our fate some moments, and when Judwin said, we have to submit, that is, we have to surrender, because they are strong, I rebelled. You see, she didn't agree with Judwin. She said, no, I will not submit. I will struggle first, I answered. So she said that first she would struggle, and then, If she is defeated, then obviously she has got no choice. Look what she did. I watched my chance. When no one noticed, I disappeared. I crept up the stairs as quietly as I could in my squeaking moccasin. My moccasins had been, my squeaking shoes, my moccasins had been exchanged for shoes. So she kept running along the hall I passed without uh, knowing whither I was going, that is, where I was going. Turning aside to an open door, I found a large room with three white beds in it. The windows were covered with dark green curtains, which made the room very dark. Thankful that no one was there, I directed my steps towards the corner farthest from the door. Uh, on my hands and knees, I crawled under the bed and huddled myself in the dark corner. So she hid herself under the bed. Now see what happens. From my hiding place, I peered out, shuddering with fear whenever I heard footsteps nearby. So because they were chasing her, so she heard the footsteps and she trembled whenever she heard the footsteps. Though in the hall, loud voices were calling my name, and I knew that even Judwin was searching for me. I did not open my mouth to answer. So obviously she was quiet. Um, then the steps were quickened and voices became excited. The sounds came nearer and nearer. Women and girls entered the room. I held my breath and watched them open closet doors and uh, peep behind large trunks. That is, they were looking for a. Someone threw up the curtains, and the room was filled with sudden light. What caused them to stop and look under the bed, I do not know. I remember being dragged out, though I resisted by kicking and scratching wildly. So she was ultimately dragged from under the bed, though of course she opposed it by kicking and scratching. Scratch मतलब हाथों से खुरचना, नोचना. In spite of myself, I was carried downstairs and tied fast in a chair. Look, उसको बाकायदा कुर्सी से बांध दिया गया. I cried aloud, shaking my head all the while until I felt the cold blades of the scissors against my neck and heard them gnaw off one of my thick braids. Braid कहते हैं लट यानी curl of hair. So she kept shaking his head and crying, and you know, she kept shaking her head even to the last moment till the scissors, she felt the scissors, and ultimately it cut one of her braids. Then I lost my spirit. So you see, since that day, I was taken from my mother. Since the day I was taken from my mother, I had suffered extreme indignities. बहुत सारी इसने cruelties फेस की थी. Um, you know, people stared at me. I had been tossed about in the air like a wooden puppet, and now my long hair was shingled like a coward's. In my anguish, I mourned for my mother, but no one came to comfort me. Not a soul reasoned quietly with me as my mother used to do, and now I was only one of the many little animals driven by a herder. तो अब उसकी क्या हालत हो गई थी, अब वो एक जानवर की तरह हो गई थी जिसको कि एक हर्डर यानी कोई चरवाहा जो है वो जानवरों को सब को एक तरफ हाँकता रहता है. So she was like that. In fact, she had lost her freedom. She had lost her identity. She was not allowed to, say, maintain her cultural values. You know, her hair was shingled. She was subjected to strict, unnecessary discipline. You see, different bells being tapped. At one bell, you have to enter the dining room. At another bell, you have to pull your chair, and at another bell, you have to start eating. So, these तरह का, the principles which are useless and meaningless. Such principles were imposed, and more importantly, her hair was shingled. सो दिस शोज कल्चरल डोमिनेंस. यानी वो लोग चाहते थे कि ये भी इनको ये जो रेड इंडियंस हैं इनको नेटिव अमेरिकन इनको इस तरह का बना के रखा जाए कि वो इनसे यानी वाइट पीपल से इंफीरियर रहे हर मानों में, और उनकी अपनी एक आइडेंटिटी बनी रहे, दूर से पहचाने जाए कि साथ ये नेटिव अमेरिकन. सो यू सी this kind of discrimination she had to face. But she struggled, she rebelled, even in her childhood. She was not the sort of person who would submit or surrender to this kind of cruelty. तो ये तो इनका experience हुआ. Now let's see Bama's experience. This extract is entitled "We Too Are Human Beings." Okay, let's read it. When I was studying in third class, I hadn't yet heard people speak openly of untouchability, but I had already seen, felt, experienced, and been um, humiliated by what it is. So this means that she had experienced untouchability even as a child. I was walking home. अब ये वाला extract इतना relevant नहीं है, लेकिन फिर भी हम इसे पढ़ लेते हैं. I was walking home from school one day, an old bag hanging from my shoulder. It was actually possible to walk the distance in 10 minutes, but it usually would take me 30 minutes at the least to reach home. So the way was short. It could be walked in just 10 minutes, but she took 30 minutes. It would take me half an hour to an hour to dawdle along, watching all the fun and games that were going on, all the all the um, disturbance, all the entertaining novelties and oddities in the streets. तो वहाँ चूँकि रास्ते में बहुत सारी चीज़ें ऐसी थी जो इसकी अटेंशन को अट्रैक्ट करती थी एज अ चाइल्ड. सो शी यूज टू टेक अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम. देखिए क्या क्या चीज़ें थी. द शॉप्स एंड बाजार्स देखिए, द परफॉर्मिंग monkey, the snake with the snake charmer, which the snake charmer kept in its box and displayed it from time to time. Here, the cyclist um, that had not gotten off his bike for 3 days and who kept paddling as hard as he could from the break of day. The rupee notes that were pinned onto his shirt uh, to spur him on, to encourage him. The spinning wheel, the Mariata Temple, the huge bell hanging there, the pongal offerings being cooked in front of the temple, the fried fish, the fried fish stall by the statue of Gandhi, the sweet stall, and the stall selling fried snacks, and all the other shops next to each other. ये सारी चीज़ें और इनके अलावा the street light always demonstrating how it could change from blue to violet. The ये this is the Tamil word Nariku Ravan uh, Nariku sorry difficult to pronounce Nariku Ravan hunter gypsy with his wild lemur. Lemur is a kind of an animal like a monkey. So selling needles, clay beads, and instruments for cleaning the ears. Oh, I could go on and on. So all these things were there. Each thing would pull me to a standstill and not allow me to go any further. At times, people from various political parties would arrive, put up a stage, and harangue us through their mics. Harangue is to deliver loud speeches. लंबी चौड़े भाषण जो देते हैं नेता लोग. Then there might be a street play or a puppet show or a no magic, no miracle stunt performance. Stunt performances भी करते थे लोग. Dangerous performances. All these would happen from time to time, but almost certainly there would be some entertainment or the other going on. Even otherwise, there were coffee clubs um, in the bazaar. The way each waiter cooled the coffee, lifting a tumbler high up, and pouring its contents into a tumbler held in the other hand. All the way, some people sat in front of the shops, chopping onions, their eyes turned elsewhere, so that it would not smart. One of the meaning of the word smart is to hurt. यानी अनियंस जब काटते हैं तो जाहिर बात है आंखों से आंसू निकलने लगते हैं तो वो अनियंस काट रहे थे मगर देख रहे थे दूसरी तरफ ताकि उनकी आईज हर्ट ना हो. Okay, again this is not so important for us. All the almond tree growing there and its fruit, which was occasionally blown down by the wind. All these sights taken together would tether my legs and stop me from going home. And then, according to the season, there would be um, mango, cucumber, sugarcane, sweet potatoes, palm shoots, gram, palm syrup, and palm fruit, guavas, and jackfruit. तो ये सब खाने पीने की चीजें थी. Every day I would see people selling sweet and savory fried snacks. Payasam means halwa or boiled tamarind seeds and iced lollies. That is lollipops. So gazing at all this, now is we are coming to the important incident. Gazing at all this, one day I came to my street, my bag slung over my shoulder. At the opposite corner, uh, though a threshing floor had been set up and the landlord watched the proceedings seated on a piece of sacking um, spread on a stone ledge. Ledge कहते हैं, you may say a piece of stone, sacking, the rough cloth of jute, बोरी जिसे बोलते हैं. So threshing floor से मतलब होता है threshing was done. To thresh is to separate grain from the husk. यानी भूसे से जो अनाज निकाला जाता है. तो वो अब तो खैर उसके लिए मशीन्स अवेलेबल हैं लेकिन उस वक्त का जो एक्सपीरियंस है विलेजेस में अब उस वक्त इंडिया में भी थ्रेशिंग फ्लोर्स होते थे. बाकायदा जानवरों के ज़रिए वो थ्रेशिंग की जाती थी. जानवरों को ग्रेन पे से आगे पीछे गुजारा जाता था तो उनके फुटस्टेप्स से जो अनाज पे जो पड़ते थे तो उससे अनाज जो है वो हस्क से अलग हो जाता था. So the landlord was there sitting on a stone ledge and watching the proceedings. Our people were hard at work, driving cattle in pairs round and round. So our people, matlab ye people belonging to her community, they were working hard. They were driving animals round and round to tread the grain from the straw, यानी grain को straw से अलग करने के लिए. The animals were muzzled so that they wouldn't help themselves to the straw. Muzzled, that is, their mouth was covered with a device of plastic or leather. ये जानवर को जब इस तरह करते थे तो उसका माउथ जो है वो बंद कर देते थे प्लास्टिक से या लेदर से, ताकि ऐसा ना हो कि वो खाने में लग जाए. तो you know, I stood for a while there watching the fun. अब देखिए, just then an elder of our street came along the direction of the bazaar. The manner in which he was walking along made me want to double up. Double up? Double up with laughter. हंस के दोहरा हो जाना जिसे कहते हैं ना. I wanted to shriek with laughter at the sight of such a big man carrying a small packet in that fashion. So, because the author was just a child at that time, ये एक छोटी सी बच्ची थी, तो इसके समझ में नहीं आया कि ऐसा क्यों हुआ. इतना बड़ा आदमी और एक छोटा सा पैकेट इस तरह से ला रहा था. कैसे देखते हैं. I guessed there was something like vadai or the green banana bhaji in the packet because the wrapping paper was stained with oil. He came along holding out the packet by its string without touching it. तो पहली बात यानी कि उसने एक स्ट्रिंग से डोरी से उस पैकेट को बांध रखा था और उस पैकेट को हाथ अपने जिस्म से नहीं लगा रहा था, टच नहीं होने दे रहा था. तो इतनी हल्की चीज एक स्ट्रिंग में इस तरह बांध के लाना, इट वॉज फनी. आई स्टूड देयर थिंकिंग टू माई सेल्फ, if he holds it like that, won't the package come undone and the vadais fall out? इस तरह से तो जो कुछ उसमें था वो गिर भी सकता था. देखिए, the elder went straight up to the landlord, bowed low, and extended the packet towards him, cupping the hand that held the string with the other hand. यानी हाथ जोड़ के उसने वो लैंडलॉर्ड को दिया. The landlord opened the parcel and began to eat the vadais. तो ये एक्सपीरियंस उसे हुआ. अब देखिए, after I had watched all this at last, I went home. My elder brother was there. I told him the story in all its comic details. I fell about, I fell about with laughter at the memory of the big man and an elder at that, making such a game out of carrying the parcel. ये इतनी छोटी सी चीज वो इस तरह से ला रहा था. But Anand was not amused. Anand is his elder brother. Anand told me that the man wasn't being funny when he carried the package like that. He said everybody believed that we were upper caste and therefore must not touch us. So because they were considered to be untouchable, so they were not allowed to touch even the food that they carried for their masters. They did not. They did. They would be. If they did, they would be polluted. अगर उन्होंने छू लिया इन्हें तो अशुद्ध हो जाएंगे ये. That's why he carried the package by its string. इसीलिए वो string में लाया था. Look what effect it had on Bama. When I heard this, I didn't want to laugh anymore, and I felt terribly sad. How could they believe that it was uh, mm, not disgusting if one of us held that package in his hands, even though the vadai had been wrapped first in a banana leaf and then parceled in paper. तो उसे बड़ी हैरत हुई कि ये ऐसा अनटचेबिलिटी यहाँ तक पहुँच सकती है, क्योंकि पहले तो जो वेजिटेबल थी उसको रैप किया गया बनाना लीफ में, फिर उसको पेपर में पैक किया गया, तो उन लोगों को इतनी भी परमिशन नहीं थी कि वो उस पेपर को भी छू सकते हैं. I felt so provoked and angry that I wanted to touch those wretched vadais myself straight away. Why should we have to fetch and carry for these people? I wondered. So she wondered why these people do these kinds of jobs. Such an important elder of ours goes meekly to the shops to fetch snacks and hands them over reverently, bowing and shrinking to this fellow who just sits there and stuffs them into his mouth. So the person who brought this was a respectable elder of their community. और उसको ऐसा करना पड़ रहा है, वो जाता है शॉप से लेके आता है, सारा कुछ कर रहा है, मगर ये he is not allowed to touch even the packet. The thought of it infuriated me. You see, her anger. जिकाला शाह ने तो प्रैक्टिकली यानी रिबेल किया था, कोशिश की थी कि उसके बाल ना काटे जाएं, लेकिन यहाँ पे बामा जो कि प्रैक्टिकली कुछ नहीं कर सकती थी, तो एटलीस्ट शी वाज एंग्री, यू नो, बिकॉज एज अ चाइल्ड फर्स्ट शी डिड नॉट नो, सो शी laughed. But when she came to know the reality, she felt very angry. Look, how is it that these fellows thought so much of themselves because they had scraped 4 coins together? To scrape coin together, ये एक फ्रेज है, मतलब मुहावरा है, यानी टू कलेक्ट मनी. तो ये लोग अपने ऊपर इस तरह अपने बारे में इतना हाईली सोचते थे, क्यों? क्योंकि उन्होंने थोड़ा सा पैसा इनके पास था. Did that mean that they must lose all human feelings? क्या इसका मतलब ये है कि वो जानवरों की तरह बिहेव करें? But we too are human beings. You see, the people who are considered to be untouchable, they are also human beings. Our people should never run these petty errands for these fellows. So she thought that errands, small jobs. So these poor people, untouchable people, should stop doing such things. We should work in their fields, take home our wages, and leave it at that. We should take wages and leave it. My elder brother, who was studying at university, had come home for the holidays. He would often go to the library in the neighboring village in order to borrow books. He was on his way home one day, walking along the banks of the irrigation tank. One of the landlord's men um, came up behind him. He thought my Anand um, looked unfamiliar, and so he called. Sorry, and so he asked, "Who are you, Appa? What's your name?" Anand told him his name. Immediately, the other man asked, "Thambi, on which street do you live?" So immediately he asked the street. You see, this is the reason why. The point of this was that if he knew on which street we lived, he would know our caste too. क्यों उसने स्ट्रीट पूछी? इसलिए कि स्ट्रीट पता चल जाएगी तो इनकी कास्ट पता चल जाएगी. So you see, that was the kind of prejudice which prevailed against the scheduled castes or the untouchables. Even now, you know, we have got bonded labor and untouchability being practiced in the remote corners of our country, in states like Bihar, um, in some of the villages. अभी भी है, अछूत माने जाते हैं लोग, उनको वो इज्जत नहीं मिलती सोसाइटी में. So you see, Anand told me all these things, and he added, because we are born into this community, we are never given any honor or dignity or respect. We are deprived of all that. But if we study and make progress, we can throw away these indignities. So that's what her brother told her, that if they study and progress, then they can overcome this. So study with care, learn all you can. If you are always ahead in your lessons, people will come to you of their own accord and attach themselves to you. Work hard and learn. So this was the uh, lesson given to her by the brother. क्योंकि अगर वो खुद मेहनत करते हैं इस तरह के लोग, तो दूसरे मजबूर हो जाएंगे उनके पास खुद आने के लिए. The words that Anand spoke to me that day made a very deep impression on me, and I studied hard with all my breath and being in frenzy almost. As Anand had urged, I stood first in my class, and because of that, many people became my friends. So you see, this was a kind of a rebellion from her. She studied hard, stood first in the class. So even those people who belong to higher communities, they started interacting with her, and they did not treat her like untouchables. So now we see that in both accounts, you know, the two persons react to their situations. They rebel. They do not submit or surrender. They suffer cruelties. They are subjected to kind of inhuman behavior. But they are bold. They have the courage to resist. Now let's quickly answer the questions at the end. Look, the two accounts that you have read above are based in two different cultures. What is the commonality of theme found in both of them? So, as I told you, the commonality of theme is that uh, in both cases there are children who face prejudice, while Zikalasa faces prejudice based against racism because she was a Native American, so she faced opposition or cruelty or discrimination from those who belong to the mainstream culture, and her hair was shingled. And Bama was the victim of untouchability. You see, she realized it when she learned it from her brother, and when she saw that an elder of her community was bringing the vadais, the packet. The packet was tied to a string, and he was holding string, and he gave it to the landlord, bowing deep, cupping his hands. He was not allowed to touch the packet, even if the vadais were first covered with banana leaves and then they were packed in a paper. Even then, they were tied to a string. So, uh, in a way, both of them suffered and both of them rebelled. Remember how Zikarasa, you know, struggled, how she kicked and scratched when she was caught, and when she was tied to a chair, even then she kept shaking her head and crying. until the last moment when the scissors ultimately cut one of her long braids and she felt like an animal. And Bama also feels that as if she were treated, as if her community were treated like animals, like she says, we are human beings too. That is, we should also be treated like human beings. So, in other words, she also felt that she, the people of her community were treated like non-humans, were treated like animals. So, this is the commonality of the theme. Now, look, it may take a long time for the oppression to be resisted. यानी कोई भी अगर जुल्म हो रहा है तो उसको अपोज करने में टाइम लग सकता है बट द सीड्स ऑफ रिबेलियन आर सोड अर्ली इन लाइफ बट एज फार एज द रूट ऑफ रिबेलियन इज कंसर्न यानी कि ये जो बगावत है इसके बीज जिंदगी में अर्ली ही बोए जाते हैं यानी बचपन से अगर हमारे अंदर ये इंस्टिंक्ट है that we should rebel against the injustice, then we would be able to oppose it. Otherwise, oppose करना मुश्किल हो जाएगा. अब question है, do you agree that injustice in any form cannot escape being noticed even by children? Yes, I would say we agree because if it is injustice, it would be noticed even by children. It is wrong to believe लोग समझते हैं कि भाई ये तो बच्चा है इसके तो समझ में ही नहीं आएगा कैसा भी बिहेवियर चाहो कर लो ऐसा नहीं है इवन चिल्ड्रन नोटिस इनजस्टिस अगर आप उनके साथ कोई इनजस्टिस करेंगे तो उन्हें एहसास हो जाता है द ओनली डिफरेंस इज दैट सम ऑफ द चिल्ड्रन आर सबमिसिव कुछ बच्चे तो खामोश हो जाते हैं चुप हो जाते हैं कोई रिएक्शन नहीं करते कुछ नहीं करते बट सम ऑफ द चिल्ड्रन आर एग्रेसिव एंड दे अपोज इट they rebel it they do not tolerate it so the point is that injustice cannot remain unnoticed even by children. It cannot remain unnoticed. Though it may take a long time to eradicate injustice. इसको पूरी तरह से अपोज करके खत्म करने में टाइम लगेगा but it is always noticed even by the children. Now, third question. Bama's experience is that of a victim of the caste system. What kind of discrimination does Zikala Sah's experience depict? Well, as I told you, Zikala Sah's experience depict the discrimination against the Native Americans, against the, um, you know, it is based on racism and, mm, you know, she wanted to, she was victimized by the mainstream culture. People wanted to kind of people shingled their hair, her hair, and they wanted that these people should be recognized immediately. तो उसको तो यानी नेटिव अमेरिकन के अगेंस्ट जो प्रेजुडिस था रेसिज्म पे बेस्ड शी वाज द विक्टिम ऑफ दैट इसी में एक क्वेश्चन और है व्हाट आर देयर रेस्पेक्टिव what are their responses to their respective situations. So their responses, their response is that of rebellion. They rebel against, um, the kind of discrimination they face. Both Zikara Saab as well as Bama, they do it. You know, um, while Zikala Sa, as we have seen, struggles hard, tries her best not to let her hair get shingled. You see, um, Bama, as she learns from uh, her brother, studies hard, you know, and stands first in her class. And so people started interacting with her, um, and that differences, that prejudice against the untouchables, that did not come into picture, and she overcame it in a way. So both of them rebelled. One person, you see, Bama, you might say, to a certain extent, succeeded, you see, in uh, what you would say, overcoming the situation. Bama ने तो situation को overcome कर लिया in her childhood itself. But Sikalasa obviously was not able to do so. She did it later on, obviously, when she grew up. बड़े होने के बाद उसने ये जो prejudice था इसको उसने overcome किया. So you see, um, these are the questions. Now I hope you would have understood it thoroughly, and now you should be able to kind of answer any question from memories of childhood. Remember, this is especially for our students of 12D and 12F, that I think it's just by mistake that these two things, a roadside stand and memories of childhood, have been included in the syllabus for exams. Otherwise, they are deleted. इवन इन सीबीएसई सिलेबस, हमारे यहाँ के सिलेबस में भी डिलीटेड है एमयू सिलेबस, लेकिन ये किसी गलती से ऐसा हो गया है. फिर भी टू बी ऑन द सेफ साइड वी हैव डन इट. But as I advised you, you can study roadside stand. I have already provided you material for that. But as far as memories of childhood is concerned, now the choice is yours. I'll advise that you may leave it for choice or give it a reading, because there would be long answer type questions. छोटे questions नहीं आएंगे तो इसको पढ़ लें तो अच्छा ही है. Otherwise, you can leave it for choice. Uh, but to share a secret with you, as far as examiners are concerned, I don't think anyone has given any question from roadside stand or um, memories of childhood. इसमें से नहीं है. पर देखिए 11th hour पे कुछ भी हो सकता है, उसकी गारंटी कोई नहीं ले सकता. मैं as a teacher I could only give you an advice. So my advice is to run through the poem and the lesson also, and then later on you can leave memories of childhood for choice. तो इसमें कोई problem नहीं आना चाहिए. And if you have any problems, you are most welcome to discuss it on your WhatsApp groups or on my personal chats. And as far as the viewers on YouTube are concerned, well, you can put your questions in the comment section, and I'll try to answer them. And in today's description, the description of the video, I will also add my WhatsApp number. So the YouTube viewers too are welcome to ask questions on WhatsApp group. I'll try on WhatsApp on my personal chat. I'll try to answer them, but the only condition is that they have to subscribe the channel. You see, if you subscribe the channel, I'd come to know of it. If you subscribe the channel and then ask a question, I'd reply it. So I'll add the contact number to the description. You can go to the description of the video, and from there you can take the number. So you see, that's how things stand, and this almost brings us to the end of the session. You see, I expect you would respond, and if necessary, then I'll come up with other videos also. And this is for the YouTube viewers. Very soon, I'd be uploading videos for CBSE class 11th core course and elective English, especially poetry. So keep track of my channel there as well. Inform those who are in class 11 now, so that they too may subscribe the channel and benefit from it. So you see, that's nearly all from me. Looking forward to your responses. I thank all of you. Take care. Good luck. Goodbye.